Yo, everybody, welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the cartoonist behind GratNin, or Gratuitous Ninja, a comic series most recently of Webtoon that has a Kickstarter for a print edition launching on March 15th. It's Ronald Wimberly. Thanks for coming on, Ronald.
Hey, what's up, man? How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. How's everything in Brooklyn today?
Oh, it's a beautiful day today, man. Like, I don't know. We had a good one yesterday, too, but it's the type of day that is either a gift or a curse for cartoonists. When you get up early and you just look outside and you're just like, wow, okay, why don't I just ditch work and go play? But yeah, it's beautiful.
I'm from Anchorage, Alaska, and I feel like Alaskans and cartoonists have something in common where it's just, if the weather is super nice, you can't help but feel like you want to go outside. And you're like, I'm trapped in here. Because Alaskans, we never have nice weather. So if it's a nice day, it's like, I'm sorry, I'm dropping everything and I'm going to go do something outside. Even if you don't like outside, you just don't know when you're going to see the sun again.
I think that's great, though. I think that actually is putting things in perspective. You know what I mean? Like the comics will get done. The writing will get done. Anything you have will get done. You could find 10, 20 minutes outside. You know what I mean? Just get some sun on you.
Exactly. You know? Yeah. I actually, this is a weird thing to say, but one of the upsides of the pandemic is I've worked from home permanently now, and it's made it so, because I'm working in my house, I'll just stay at home all day. But since then, I've decided I need to take a walk outside regularly. So I take like 3 or 4 walks outside, and it actually, I feel like it has a really positive impact on my mood and just how I feel about things.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. I should do it more often. Today, I met with a friend. I took a bike ride up the block to where he is and met with him and his wife. And yeah, I mean, I have good energy now. So I feel like I'm going to be really receptive to answering questions or talking. Like I'm opened up a little bit because you know what? The sun is magical, man.
It is. It is. You got to come to Alaska at some point. The 24-hour Sundays are pretty unusual. It's a pretty amazing experience.
Yeah, so that's what we were actually talking about at this little afternoon coffee. I was like, well, he's talking about possibly moving to Florida. Like, it's just too much. He needs a little bit of a break. He needs more sunshine and he needs more space. New York space is a premium. But he was also saying, like, what if I got a spot like a little bit out of the city where I could have more space, and then also just like when the winter comes, just like a bird fly down, south. Yeah. And I particularly love that idea because, yes, longer days up north in the summer are great, and then it's like it's the opposite that fucking kills me. You know what I mean? Yeah, like no sun. There was a comic about that, vampires in Alaska or something, right?
30 Days a Night. Yeah, set in Barrow, Alaska. I actually went there. It's the northernmost city, although city is kind of generous. It's more like a town that is in Alaska. I went there in December, and I've told this story on the podcast before. I just think it's hilarious, though. It's I walked in to rent a car when I went in there in December, and I was like, when does it get light out? And the guy laughed and said March.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh. It's wild. It's super wild. But anyways, well, we're recording this on March 4th. This is not your first Kickstarter, as you and Beehive Books have funded Lab through the platform. We talked about this a little bit before where I said maybe it's the point where you're just hashing out the details. And so it's like a lot of fine tuning at this point. And you said you're one of the details.
Yeah.
What is it like for you when you're like 5 days before launching something like this?
Well, I mean, I think with anything you do, choosing the right partners is like one of the biggest parts. And so Josh and Mael at Beehive are just excellent partners on this thing. So I know, I think I know what my strengths are, and I'm getting to the point where I'm aware of a lot of my weaknesses. And I feel like Josh and Mael help me sort of mitigate that. Like as a team, we're just so strong. You know what I mean? So like, what I meant by being one of the details is I can kind of trust Mael and Josh to place me in the right position to use my strengths. You know what I mean? Like even the ones that I don't like to use, which is like being in public at times. So I trust them to handle these certain aspects. When it comes to GratNin, like when it comes to like a lot of the design choices, a lot of the aspects, the creative aspects that actually went into making the objects, it's like that's my strong suit. When it comes to kind of ramping up a Kickstarter, um, it's a type of thing I run from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Honestly, like this is going to sound, I don't know, maybe strange. I think actually it's a really important strength for people to have to recognize what they're good at and what they're bad at. Or excuse me, not bad at, just not what they're best at. And like knowing that there are people that you can turn to. And I have to say, like just looking through Beehive's site, they know how to make a book.
hmm And they have a great track record. I like their approach to it. You know what I mean? So, and me and Josh and I were friends for a while. You know what I mean? Like we met in Philly, and we got along pretty well. And he's always been supportive of my art practice. So it just made a lot of sense. He asked me, "Oh, did you want to do something?" And I described lab to him, as much as you can describe it. And then we just, since it's been, we're making history now.
I do think it's interesting. I mentioned before we started recording that, for first time guests, I like to kind of go back to the beginning.
Mhm.
And it is interesting to look at something like Lab and then look at, I was reading an interview with you where you talked about how like your earliest memories of reading comics were like the Sunday funnies.
Mhm.
And your very first experience with comics almost set you on the path to making something like that. Because I imagine it's just like, you look at something like a broadsheet newspaper and it's just like, I don't know if it's just nostalgia, but it's just like good feelings when you see that, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, you can't really get away from, you know, the conditions that created you or the conditions you were in, at your very beginning. And yeah, the newspaper, the quality of something that comes and look, I was probably getting the newspaper or getting a portion of the newspaper after the adults had gotten it, right?
Right.
And it was interesting, like what else do you have? And even the way I grew up, like I had various kind of environments I'd be in. I might be by myself, you know what I mean? Like typical of my generation, like I spent a lot of time by myself, like latchkey kid type of thing. But also I spent a lot of time in a house with like aunts, uncles, grandma, great grandma, you know what I mean? Kids running around, seen and not heard type of thing. And in that environment to have something that, okay, I'm going to get a piece of the paper, the same paper that my uncles got, or like, my stepdad maybe went through, like he gave me the thing, the section outside of it. Right. And it's like, first of all, it's communal. And like, I'm doing the same thing that like these other people are doing. There's something there for me, even though they like comics as well. But like, I was particularly interested in, Charlie Brown, Snoopy. And so, yeah, it's just so formative. It's tactile. It's like I could talk about newspapers forever, but like it it did set me on a path. You know what I mean? Like that, probably like Chick Tracks.
Yeah.
Two earliest comic experiences.
I didn't even know that the Chit Tracks existed until like, God, like 6 years ago. I don't even know how
Oh
it
wow.
completely escaped me. I blame being in Alaska. I'm just away from everything. I don't know things. We get stuff way later.
Mm. My parents were very Christian. You know what I mean? Like, so I remember this one time I went to the bathroom at somebody's house. We had this little, this was after we kind of had a transitional period. Like we were, we were in more suburban spaces and I was a young adult. I was maybe 12, 13 or something. And I remember there was a church meeting in this person's house and I went to the bathroom and like, how people have, I don't know, on the top of the, what do you call it? The
Like
tank.
bathroom
They
books.
might have some, yeah, they might have some. There was like a little basket where there might be potpourri, but there were Chick Tracks in there. And like, so I picked it up and I started to flip through it. I'm like, yo, this is bugged out. Like, somebody, it would always be something like, okay, Jack is loose in his morals and he likes to sleep with girls, and it's like, fuck all that. I'm gonna do what I want to do. Then it's like he gets in a he gets I'm sorry, he gets like AIDS or something,
Yeah.
right? And he dies. And then God's like, son, I wish you could come into heaven, but you were a hoe, so like you can't get into heaven. Like that's the type of thing that these chick tracks were like. And they were sometimes they were kind of the drawings were funny and loose, or sometimes really lurid and like overwrought. But it was definitely formative, and it was definitely for kids. That was the age of things manipulating kids, like Joe Camel and chick tracks. I think were like you know.
I feel like everything back in, because I grew up, I'm like 5 years younger than you. I grew up in the 80s as well. And I feel like almost everything was very much aimed at kids, even when, I mean, obviously when like Joe Camel, when it really shouldn't be, because they kind of knew that if you made something that was cool looking or like vaguely animated looking or something like that, that it was going to connect with you. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ended up being such a big deal. Like, not to jump into ninjas and not to say that that is like the number one thing for you for ninjas. I feel like for a lot of kids in the 80s, that was just this gateway into ninjas because it had everything. It had ninjas, which we were already attracted to, and like these random turtle dudes running around
Right.
eating pizza and stuff.
Turtles are cute. Pizza's delicious.
Right?
Like yeah.
Yeah.
No, Ninja Turtles definitely was kind of like a synthesis, like a smash up of all of these different things, and like I mean, much to the credit of the creators, it's not like it was unthought of, but yeah, I mean that's the thing. I've spent a lot of time looking back and kind of getting into the history of. I'm really into the material conditions that produce certain, I guess, aesthetic waves or trends, or like where aesthetics come from.
Mm-hmm.
And I've thought an awful lot about it. You know what I mean? Like, I wrote an article about it in Lab, but when we were kids, like the '80s, we were in the middle of the Baburu Keiki, like the Japanese bubble, and I think economically that influence, that sort of battle that we were having, the states was kind of having with a great opponent slash like a frenemy. You know what I mean? Like a almost like a colonial subject at times, but not quite. But like we were in the thick of it in the '80s, and I think it bore out in the culture. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if you remember, but when I was a kid, we had like Frigidaire and like all of these other like American brands like TVs. We had like Magnavox. But by like the mid '80s, like everything was Japanese.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, but you almost like just take it for granted, right? All of the ninja movies were huge. It was like the culture trying to come to terms with the history and the economics. You know what I mean? And I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is definitely part of that. I mean, it's massive, like Peter Chung on the intro, you know what I mean? Another great hero of mine. Like,
I mean, even something like my first comic I ever read I was basically ride or die with Transformers. They were everything to me.
Right.
And that was part of it too. I mean, it was funny because to me, it was just like, they're just robots that turn into like cars or something. I just thought they were the coolest thing in the world. But I mean, that was part of that. I mean, they didn't originate here. They came from Japan too.
Right.
And it is interesting how like, you don't really think about it, but so much of the 80s was influenced by that. And it influenced an entire generation without a lot of them even. I mean, that's one of the things I think was really interesting about reading interviews with you is it seems like you're really fascinated by the relationship with stories and comics and art and how it connects with the past. Like you like to look back and kind of see how it all connects together. What is it about that for you? Like, is that just something that's always been a fascination for you? Or is that just something you've gotten into as an artist as you've gotten further along?
I think it's also for better or worse just an artifact of and this is becoming almost like a what do you call it? Ouroboros or whatever, because it is it is a artifact of like what I come from. Like I come from, like I'm born in sort of the late postmodern age, right? So like I think the whole way of looking at culture and is as it's part of being in a continuum. How all of these different things are like fed by history, and like there's nothing new under the sun type of type of deal, right? And how history keeps rhyming, and then often like the aesthetics keep rhyming. When I say history, I mean like as it's constructed, like a construction of the past. You know what I mean? And like we go back and we look for these stories and we build out the story of how we live in the moment by looking at the stories of the past. So when that kind of really hit me is hard to say, because I feel like, that's been kind of part of the dominant culture, or a conversation in the dominant culture, as long as I've been around. And, when I got to college, I had a professor, David Pasalakwa, and one of the things that he would do is when we came in to do our work, he would ask us questions and sort of get us to think about how we fit into the history of the arts, like the other illustrators who came before us. Like, what is a tradition that we're a part of? Like, how are we responding to what came before us? Like, and that's another time when I got into like, you know, uh, Japanese prints like ukiyo-e, like floating world stuff, because I saw a direct connection. And this was also around the time, like by the time I graduated college, like super flat was hitting heavy. Um, I saw a connection between a lot of the manga that I was reading that, I had been into, some of the comics, the graphic tradition that I was in, with like these old drawing based graphic works of art. And I think I don't see how you get through that without kind of like seeing the connection to history, and how you relate to it. I mean, it's just very interesting to me. Like I can I can get lost in it forever, man. Like I don't know, history, the past, the construction of the past, the artifacts, the graphics, endless source of amusement, inspiration, and sometimes just like stress.
Overwhelming.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Isn't that where GratNin kind of came from? Was sort of looking at the past and looking at varying masters of like ninja stories, and then kind of figuring out where where a story that came from you would fit in all of that.
It's very interesting. Like the so like GratNin has also been like several different iterations. Like the most recent version um was kind of inspired by Shirado Sanpei, who did Ninja Bugetsu, right? Like which we yet to really get like a good decent translation in English.
It was your first work though, right?
It was. So the first version I did at Pratt Institute here in Brooklyn as part of like the Static Fish. It was like a uh college comic book. And I had only drawn one comic before, really. Maybe I had done sequential art in a class, but like this was, like for an assignment or something. This was like my second comic. And the first one was really talky. It was kind of influenced by uh David Cho's slow jams. The second one was like, I think I had found at Jim Hanley's in the city. I found some copies, the Dark Horse copies of Arzak. And so I was looking at Mobius and I was like, wow, I want to just like kind of, GratNin has always been a place for me to explore things formally. So I was like, okay, I want to just focus on action, silence, no like sort of written script, no narration. So I don't know where the ninjas came up. I don't even know how. It's just like, I guess for me and us probably being of the same age, when you think of just like action and silence, it's like, what is it? What is more, embodies that than a ninja? So I started to do this comic that was silent. And it certainly, I was into a lot of, I've always been into like Japanese films. So like that definitely was influence. But I think it was the original, motivation was that formal problem to solve. It's like I wanted things to move. I wanted things to be spectacular. And I and I didn't want to write a script. I didn't want to write narration.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and yeah, my first gig, my first printed comic was for Dark Horse, was also a GratNin comic.
It was Tangerine, right?
Yeah. Many iterations ago. I think that's silent too, though. I don't think there's any words in it. I think that's when GratNin is still silent at that point.
It's funny when I first started reading GratNin, KGMR? KGMR?
Yeah.
On Webtoon, I came across the part where it was like chapter 4, episode 1. And I was like, where are the other 3 chapters?
Yeah.
But I mean, it works. It works completely. But at the same time, it was funny jumping into that. I do think it's funny, though, because even in the comic form, I think that, so like I originate more in like reading Marvel and like DC stuff. And I think if you ask a lot of people who kind of grew up or were, going through a formative period during the 80s, the comic that they would think of as like a silent comic is actually the G.I. Joe issue where Snake Eyes is the main character, and it's completely silent. It's complete. And I remember like it being like this big deal because people were like, why are there no words?
Yeah. He's also a ninja, though. He's also another big ninja from my youth. Like Snake Eyes was my favorite. And when I say G.I. Joe, I mean the toy with the little rubber band in the middle.
Right.
Like that was my favorite G.I. Joe. Whichever ones there. I think there were several versions during my youth. There's one I feel like he had like two knives on his chest. You know what I mean? Like that toy went so hard, yo. Like that was like my favorite toy. And it's like another thing is like you just never saw their face. So I feel like you could definitely imprint anything onto Snake Eyes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, and I don't think I read that comic. There was a G.I. Joe comic I remember that just like, it was kind of like people talk about, when they found out about Santa Claus, whatever. You know what I mean? I'm not going to spoil that because I know we could be a little late in the comic book world. I don't want to spoil Santa Claus for anybody, so I'm not going to tell them the surprise. But when I found out when Snake Eyes, they pulled his mask off and he had like blonde hair and blue eyes, I was like, what the fuck? Like, I thought like it's like I've seen it could have been like a Japanese dude or something. I didn't know, like, I was just like, wow. So this whole time I was blown, bro. Like that I mean, not for nothing. It kind of mind fucked me, bro. I was like, wow. So
I didn't actually know that was the case. I had no idea what he looked like under there. That is disappointing, weird, strange. I don't know.
Did Hama write that?
Larry Hama, right? Yeah, he wrote it. I actually, the sad thing, I don't know who was the artist on that issue. And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. Macroverse is a next-generation digital comics platform, and one with an astonishing number of comics, with currently over 50 series from over 100 creators on their app, with a 5-star rating both on Apple and Google's app stores. Download the app and binge all their titles, including the Eisner-nominated Remind from Jason Brubaker, Lisa K. Weber's Hex 11, which has been described as Harry Potter meets Blade Runner, or the new queer supernatural adventure series Husk that launches on November 1st. It's just $4.99 a month to subscribe to Macroverse, with proceeds directly supporting the creators on the platform. Keep an eye on the future of Macroverse too, as 2022 is going to bring an epic upgrade that offers a new level of digital collectability and more, with early adopters able to sign up for more information at macroverse.com. And now, back to the show. I have a tendency of going like amateur psychology on this show, so I apologize in advance, but
no.
I do think it's interesting that you like to look at history and you like to look at where you kind of fit in this, and it kind of turns into your art and everything like that. But also it's like, I don't know. I mean, your love of ninjas when you were younger, and like it being a big part of the culture during your like younger years and your formative years and everything like that. You said like why did GratNin end up being ninjas, or like exploring that silent aspect? I don't know. I mean, it's in terms of your personal history, it almost feels like it was necessary for you to eventually tell a story like that because it was such a big part of your life when you were younger.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. It's just an interesting, yeah. I mean, I'm not the only one.
No,
I
no.
mean, that's another thing too, is like if you're definitely a DC Marvel person, it's like, come on, you had like Daredevil, like X-Men was rotten with Ninja.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure, I don't know, I didn't read Batman like that, but I'm sure there was like ninjas in that. Like, it was just an age where ninja were everywhere. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, and it's interesting because I'm trying to think of like what other examples do we have? It's such an interesting figure that finds its way through like the cultural myth, of our cultural myth. You know what I mean? Like,
Video games too.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I love Strider on the Sega
yeah,
Genesis, and then there was like
yeah,
Ninja Gaiden that came after
yeah,
that, and like
yeah.
I don't know, it was inescapable. It was kind of hard not to like ninjas when you're that age. Going back a little bit, you mentioned that this was like the second sequential comic you'd really done.
The first GratNin, yeah.
You went to school for illustration. Did you want to make comics? Was that kind of your plan?
Um, no, I had no interest in making comics when I first got to Pratt. I was very naive about art. I announced my major as art direction. I didn't really know what that meant. I think I took, it was over 20 years ago now, but like I think I took direction to mean that I would somehow be working with story and film.
Mm.
No, I had no idea I was going into advertising. So around, I guess, the end of my sophomore year, I switched majors to illustration because it's weird when you talk about your past, you're kind of like projecting. You're making up a story about what happened. So I'll do my best to give some truth, but I think it came down to like I was just really, I could draw, I could make pictures, um, and I think I was very practical at that point. It was the thing that I had most value to give, but I still wanted to tell stories, and that's how I ended up in the Pratt Static Fish, the comic book club,
Hmm.
and with a bunch of people who were very passionate about the medium. I was passionate about some comics. I was not necessarily passionate about the medium. So like there were some comics that I was very like just as works of art. It's like wow, I'm really into that. I really love. It's like you could be in movies, but you're not necessarily like a cineast or something.
Right.
Um, but then I became very interested in the form.
Hmm.
Like the how to do what some of these great cartoonists were doing with the form, and what were they doing. And from there, I think this relationship I've had with the medium for, a few years now, that's where it came from, and also kind of chasing that fix of like, the first time you read a comic that you really love. So I feel like I've been chasing a few feelings that a few comics gave me for like my whole life. It's just, it's I think Paul Pope said a comic is like a love letter or something like that. And that's really like a comic. You pick up just one of these small comics, maybe like you went to SPX or something and you picked up a little zine or something. And it's just like, yo, it's very intimate,
Hmm.
so it's really special. Like you're in another world for a little bit.
Another Paul had I think it was Paul Levitz who said this, where he said that basically like your favorite comic, or at least like the one that hits you the hardest, is the one that you loved the most when you were like 12 or 13.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's necessarily true as much as it's just there's that one comic that hits you at the one point in your life where it's just going to kind of carry with you going forward. And maybe it hits you when you're 12 or 13. Maybe it
Mm.
hits you when you're 18. Maybe it hits you when you're like, I don't know, 46. I have no idea. But I do think that there is something to that love letter line where you're kind of living up to that work before. But just to give listeners understanding as to what the most current iteration of GratNin is all about, the version that's on Webtoon, I'm going to read the solicit that's on, or I don't even know if you call it a solicit, the breakdown of what it's about on Webtoon. In the modern world, are ninjas gratuitous? What's good of being a ninja if you can't protect your hood? Brooklyn's last shinobi family are pacifist hippies, but when their three latest recruits, an anarchist vandal, a weed dealer, and the city's best delivery man, secretly use their ninja skills to fight crime, they cause more trouble than they solve. It's a great comic. I love how it uses the format. I do think it's interesting, though, looking at it in like the prism of a lot of the other stuff you've done, particularly Lab, because I mentioned Lab already. It's like a newspaper format. So it's like working within a different form, or not even a different form. It's an older form that's been repurposed for what you're trying to do. And, you know, for this, this story was initially on Stila, the mobile comics platform that I don't think is around anymore.
Yeah, certainly not in the way that it was.
No.
When I was on it, yeah.
So obviously GratNin is something that's been carrying with you for your entire career, but was part of the interest in, were you really interested in trying something new with the format, with what Stila offered, and then Webtoon? Was that where it kind of came down to, and GratNin just was a vehicle to examine that?
For sure. Like, so GratNin, like this version of GratNin is something that I've been writing, you know, it's something I've been thinking about. And at the time, oh, you know what? I got this residency in Angoulême. That's when I was drawing it.
Mm-hmm.
So in France, like Southwest France, is a comic book residency in a maison in a house on a hill. Beautiful. They have it at the best time of the year. You know, the convention is in the middle of winter, except for this year. But the residency, I guess, is all year round. I went in the spring. It was fucking beautiful. But yeah, all of those things came together, man. Like, I had the story, and I was really intrigued by the formal problem. You know, like, so what is a Infinite Scroll comic going to be like? You know, and how are you going to do it? And I started out drawing it. I thought, okay, I'll print this eventually, right? I'll print this eventually. So I started out drawing it on like spreads. In Angoulême, I had a really big desk with a light table. So for the first time in my life, I'd draw my pencils and then I'd do the light table over the top, like, and I was working in spreads. And then I think they started to come out, or I started to get my momentum, and I'm like, this makes no sense. So then I started to do the panels independently on pieces of paper and scanning them in, right? And at this point, I think the first issue or two, I was lettering with the mouse. You know what I mean? Like, it was, I don't even remember how I did it. Then, after a while, I started to actually work on paper in a vertical format, thinking about pages as being like, I don't know, 4 screens tall. You know what I mean? And then like just breaking it down like that. And for me, like that type of thing is just really, I imagine like somebody, you get a new game that you want to play, like some type of ping pong or something like that. The way it makes your mind and body sort of get excited about solving that problem. That's what that was like for me. And it was super fun. And now to turn it back into print is almost a similar, it's like, yeah, so what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to do it? Like it's really fun. It's really great. And I think we landed on something that I think it's dope. Like, it's pretty weird. It's crazy.
Okay. So I have to ask, I was going to bring this up later, but I was actually talking with my wife earlier about this because I have not seen what the print product is going to look like. The Kickstarter page is not live yet. It just has a single image. I know it's 600 accordion style pages that are bringing this story to life. And my wife and I decided that the reason why it's accordion style is because it's going to fold out so it can read like the mobile style pages. I have no idea if that's true. That was our guess. Is that why you needed those accordion style pages, or is it something else?
Yeah, no, that's how we went. That's how we decided to do it. Like, we had a lot of wild ideas. Like, Josh was partial to a scroll, which is like Ninja Scroll. Yeah, that sounds great.
It's weird to read.
I'm like, I don't know. I got to be able to read it. I was partial to a subway map that you could read kind of like, 4 screens at a time. And then you could, but then that was maybe a little unwieldy too. And then, yeah, we just decided each episode will be an accordion book. You could literally, if you were on the ground, you know what I mean? You could just have it in a way that you could never see it online, all as one strip.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, or for each episode, and you could attach the episodes. But like, yeah, that's what it feels like. It's about, I don't know if people can't see me, but it's about, like it's about this, each page is about this big, and then you fold it, and that's four. And like how I would read it is, I would just like pinch and then pull and go over. You know what I mean? And like, we're doing the work to repace the frames and the panels so that they land in the right way. I don't know, it's pretty interesting, and it's not as unwieldy as I was originally worried about, because I don't like, building stories is a masterpiece, right? I
Right.
don't fucking read it, bro. Like, I can't read. It's like, this is a box, this is a puzzle. Like, this is not a comic. You know what I mean? Like, I can't. I mean, it's beautiful, but like, I don't want. I'm like the opposite of Josh. I don't want to get. I want to read the comic as easily as possible, right? So like, for us to work together on this was really interesting, because my ethic around comics is, and this is around the infinite scroll thing too, is like, how can I get out of the way, or how can the technology facilitate the experiencing of this story, which is like a combination of visual, graphic, idioms, and whatever.
I think it's interesting because reading it on Webtoon, this isn't me casting aspersions about comics that are done on an infinite scroll, but you can tell sometimes when it's like a person who's used to making comics in like comic format, like excuse me, like the single issue comic format, is trying to make it work in there, because there's always like it's like a tension where it isn't made for that. It's made for the eventual print product. And one thing I really like about yours is, as I was reading it, there's almost like this propulsive energy to it where you just like want to keep moving. It's just like there's a rhythm to reading it. Like there's this one part in the third episode, I think it was, where it was Roxy giving Mo it was Mo giving Roxy a boost up.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and then Roxy gives like a thumbs up to say that she got up there. And you do it in a way where when you're reading it in the scroll, it almost takes the place of a traditional panel break. And it's just like the thumbs, and I'm doing a thumb as if anybody can actually see this. But anyways, and I thought that was interesting because that was one of those things where it wouldn't work as well in a traditional print comic. And it's interesting. It was like when I was reading it, it almost felt like as you were creating it, you were thinking about energy or like the vibe of it as much as like specific narrative goals. Is that like an outlandish statement?
Not at all. I mean, I'm a bit of like a cartoonist partisan. Like, I think that's the job, really. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to synthesize the story as almost like a literary thing, with like the story as a pictorial thing. You know what I mean? And so I think I don't know, that is my goal. So I'm more successful sometimes than others. But also, when I'm thinking about that, like, I'm definitely the type of artist or designer, when it's like we get a job that comes in, not at first. It's come at the cost of lots of time. And I didn't start out this way. But like, I want to know the shape of whatever it is before we even start. I mean, like, let's define the terms of what this is, so then we can design around it. You know what I mean? Like, the container is very important. The format is very important. So, and that's how I was thinking. Like, I wanted to make this, it's UX. You know what I mean? It's like, comics is UX, it's not pictures of a script. You know what I mean? It's not like storyboards even, right? It's not storyboards, it's UX. You gotta kind of like, you're creating an experience, and it's down to like what paper you choose, or like what, how you're going to use the infinite scroll. Like, one of the things that, a lesson I was learning the whole time was density, the density of the Infinite Scroll. My comics, my Infinite Scroll are denser than some people would like. You know what I mean? Like things are happening continuously. One of the things, there's some artists that do that work that I really do like the way it's just they breathe.
Yeah.
When I moved it from Stila to Webtoon, I did make it breathe a little bit more. Actually, it's not even the first time I tried to do it digitally because I on Tumblr, Jesus, man, it's been a while. On Tumblr, I did a version of GratNin called Loan Sharks, and it was a version of Kibo, like pre Kibo. Like this was a different version of him, where he was running from people who were collecting on his school loans.
Mm.
He thought they were like agents from the lender, but they were pirates who had robbed those guys and put on their clothes.
Oh my God.
And yeah, so like this, you know what? In another iteration of KGMR, I will probably figure out how to put this story in there because I liked it so much, right? But that was when I was first starting to figure out that sort of spacing and pacing. But I was working in Tumblr, so it was something completely different.
Yeah.
You know?
There's this one guy I know who does a webcomic called False Knees. It's his name is Joshua Barkman, and he has his comic on 15 different platforms.
Wow.
And when he came on the podcast, he said something along the lines of just basically like one of the toughest parts of the job is trying to make the comic work in all these different formats. And I honestly cannot even imagine that. And I do think it's interesting, though, to think about that and think about the print version you're doing with, like, I read that you went into this project with like specific formless constraints, like limiting yourself to a certain amount of screen heights per episode or your palette. And I think that's really interesting because, you know, I don't know. I talked to cartoonists and artists and writers and everybody, and it seems like as contradictory as maybe a reader might think, it seems quite often like constraints can be really creatively useful and like fruitful.
Yeah. No, I think I don't know. Maybe there are different takes on this. I think they're essential. I think they're there whether or not you've realized they're there. I think seeing
the format.
Them, yeah.
Yeah.
There are constraints. You know what I mean? Like budgetary, audience, market, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's the Sistine Chapel. Like, okay, I gotta satisfy the church. I got like however many hundreds of characters. You know what I mean? Like, what am I gonna do? I gotta be on my back, like, you know, painting on like there's always a constraint. It's poetry.
Right.
I think the sooner you figure that out, the better. And sometimes, you know, like you got to figure out what your constraint is to get you to where you need to go. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of kinky. You know what I mean? Like you maybe need to like bind yourself in a way so that you can find, you know, what that, you know, that solution is. Like one of my favorite examples is like, I love, you know, there's some of my favorite animated films, like, you know, Japanese animation or like mediums or films where they figured out a way of being really creative to, you know, go around economic constraints. I think like a lot of anime, that's how, you know, a lot of the anime aesthetic comes from that. Like back in like I think it was around the 70s when they were doing like Disney, it's like Milk Call and all of these cats was doing like 101 Dalmatians or whatever. Like from my understanding is they save money on inking by Xeroxing the pencils. You know what I mean? Like that's why those 70s films have that great sort of like gritty look. You know, it's not like the inked line version. You know what I mean? Like I think, and out of that problem comes like a brilliant new aesthetic. I think, yeah. So yes, I agree with you, and I would love to talk to an artist who feels the opposite, because I want to know like how.
I don't think it's other artists as much as like readers, because like I think readers are like, oh my god, comics, it's a land of infinite freedom and stuff like that. But
Mm.
I think that they also forget, and I'm kind of attacking like a theoretical version of a reader right now. So apologies to this reader that it doesn't exist necessarily. But like you said, there's always going to be restraints. Format. I mean, one you didn't mention, time. I mean, like deadlines are one of the greatest restraints of them all. And it's like
Hmm.
sometimes I remember talking to an artist once who said that they thought that the greatest influence on their art is time, deadlines.
Hmm.
It's like you can't sit around thinking about how like Mike Mignola affected you when you're like, I got this comic that's due tomorrow.
Right.
And I don't know, it's really interesting. But
Absolutely.
I have to ask,
But you should, because that he's a master of economy.
right, exactly.
Maybe that'll help, you know?
Yeah, if you got the time constraint, Mignola's the right guy to call on.
Right. Keep looking at him, Toth, like, you know, look at the kings of that.
Keep those lines simple and you'll get through it faster. That's another thing I think is fascinating talking to artists. When I was a kid, I like loved the guys who threw down like detail, like John Romita Jr. I was like, more lines the better. I was Jim Lee, et cetera, et cetera. But it is interesting where I talk to artists now, and it's almost like the further they get in their career, the more they're looking to reduce their line to simplify it. And I think that's a fascinating thing to learn as an outsider, that's like the desired end game, not more. Less is more.
Yeah, well, we have a different. I don't know who are the kings of comics, right? I'm gonna say manga is the king of comics. Like we just gonna say even market wise, right?
Sure.
Like we might say outsized influence, superheroes are big, but like people are watching the movies. Like how many Spider-Man comics are selling?
Right.
You know, when it comes to manga, like the way people read manga, they go through those things fast. You know what I mean? The way you experience manga, it's quick. Even your reading is almost synthesized the picture and looking at the language, right? It's like boom, 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 and you keep it moving. If you're an artist or if you really appreciate the art, maybe like you're fixating, you're staying, you will spend a year reading, Akira, right? But like if you are reading it at a pace, like at a decent clip, like you're going, it's almost tragic because when you have someone like Ultimo, right, where even his assistants are like masters, right? Like while they're still assistants, they're masters, right? You could sit and linger on those pages, but I don't think you're really meant to. And I think great cartooning, is that it is about economy. Like Calvin and Hobbes is like, the virtuosity on display is insane, but also that virtuosity is expressed in its economy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and I personally think like, there's a difference. Everybody's got a different strokes, different folks. My way, like if you have a way, my way of comics, of cartooning is about economy. Like I am an illustrator and I'm a cartoonist. You know what I mean? My approach to those things is different. Like making a beautiful picture or a painting, like the amount of details, I think could even be counterproductive to the type of work that I'm trying to do as a cartoonist.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends, right? Like, I think we brought up Mobius before. Like, Mobius may make a page that is a picture. You're meant to linger on it and explore and like to sit and, sit with it. So like maybe what I said is bullshit. Like you got to find your way. You know what I mean? Like if you're a cartoonist, but I do think it's different.
And now, a quick word from one of off-panel's sponsors. That sponsor's Bad Idea. Bad Idea paid for the sponsorship, but they won't give me anything to promote since they're over. So here I am, saying the name Bad Idea. Contractually. I have to. That's it. Bad Idea. Their thing, I guess. And now, back to the show. It also depends on the project, right? Because it's like, I think one of the things that's really interesting about this Kickstarter for GratNin is that you're putting together a print project that was very specifically designed and created within the restraints of one format. and you're now translating that into a format that is completely different. And it is really interesting to see, you and the Beehive team basically work together to try to find something that allows you to maintain that energy and that flow while still being a print product. And I don't know. I mean, what was that process like? Was it just a lot of experimentation and throwing ideas against the wall? I mean, you already mentioned some of the things you were doing, but was that a difficult process to find the right solution?
I mean, I'm blessed. It's just been a lot of it's been a lot of play. Like I have one of my partners on lab on this, the designer Chloe Chef. Like we between me, Josh, and Chloe, we just show up and play. Like I think one of the things that's great about working with the three of them is that I can trust them to do what they do. Like, and that allows me to kind of like, we can express our concerns and kind of, I think, trust that we're going to solve the problem in a good way. So it can be playful. It's not to say that we don't kind of bump heads or disagree with each other at times, but it's been very, very healthy and playful. And I think like that play aspect comes up, creates good solutions, you know.
In its own way, having creative partners to work with on something like this, it's not the same as like formal restraints, but it's almost like, if you did it by yourself, it would look like one thing. But working with this team allows you to find the best solution. I don't know. It seems like that's one thing that's kind of interesting to look at your career with like this and lab and some other things that you've done. Is just, it feels like having a good group of people around you has always been like an essential part of bringing the best version of your art to life.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is this. I think my art practice is somewhat solitary. Starting out, it was not always healthy, my relationship with the business and I think this sort of collaborative aspect is really also about me figuring out a way to work that is socially fulfilling, like, okay, can I make it a pleasure to do this work? Yeah, pleasure is like my guide. Another added bonus is that the book will be something for me to explore too.
Yeah.
And not just like the work of my.
Have you made like I don't know, I have to imagine you did, but was there like a test run done already where you looked at it?
Yep. Obviously, we've already done promotional photography. Mael had me out in, Williamsburg on the waterfront taking photos. Yeah, I've seen the box. Bro, it's fucking dope. I'm like, yo, it's dope.
I said this earlier. I was looking at Beehive's site, and like some of the books they put together is just like staggering. Production value is really important to me. It's like if I just wanted something like kind of, sometimes there's like a, with lab, it's like it's a newspaper and it's inherently built to be, I don't want to say disposable, but there's like the nature of newsprint. But at the same time, it's like sometimes the right solution is something that's just like completely like beautifully put together in that same way.
Yeah, I mean, that's the line that we try to walk. Personally, that's one of my sort of design constraints. This is going to sound kind of sadistic. Even with lab, I want to make something that is beautiful, but also in a bittersweet way, like it's decaying. Like it is. GratNin is not so much like that as lab. Though when we would talk about packaging, I would definitely be like, yo, I mean, I used to love and Japan is crazy for this. I don't want to tear this open. This packaging is amazing. It's beautiful, right? Mm-hmm. And like that's I want even the act of opening something or the act of something decaying or the act of destroying something to be just like a sensual and maybe even beautiful experience.
Yeah.
So that yeah, and I think Josh is good for us. Like we're a good team on that because like I am just I'm taking with the beauty of the temporary. Like I love magazines. I love newspapers. I've got newspapers that shouldn't even probably have lasted to this era here. You know, like old interview magazines, like back when that was like a newspaper. You know, like I got some crazy joints here. And yeah, so we brought that same ethic to GratNin. It's more permanent, but
It makes sense that, these print projects would be a labor of love for you because I'm not just playing off the fact you said sensual, but it does feel like you almost have like you have romantic feelings for print projects. It's like,
yeah.
it's something that's mattered to you. So you want to make sure what you do matters to someone else.
Yeah. And like I mean it's something I consider, and like who knows if this is always going to be something that I'm doing. Like maybe print technology at a point becomes immoral, right?
Right.
I don't know if we're there yet. You know, like it's crazy because we're at a time when like, this is a really big conversation. And I don't think it's there yet, but like I do, every time Image is like, oh, well, we want to print more Prince of Cats. I'm like, yo, doesn't everybody who has a copy of Prince of Cats already have a copy of Prince of Cats? Like, I don't want there to be Prince of Cats in. I don't want trees to be in Prince of Cats form in a warehouse somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want that. Like, people are like, oh, so are you going to make posters of the New Yorker cover, or like, yeah, the New Yorker's like, oh, I got the little thing. It's like a license so that they can, sign off to do. I'm like, no, tear off the cover. No one's going to have a t-shirt with my work license. Like it was a magazine cover.
Right.
Like, it was a comic book. Like, I mean, as much as I love all of the merchandising and stuff that I grew up with, like Spider-Man pajamas and shit, I don't know what it would take for me. Like, I mean, I will be as concerned with it. Like, so the fact that we're doing a print GratNin, it's like, it has to be something beautiful enough to merit that we're making it in a quantity that is reasonable enough. That's what I love about, crowdfunding is we have a good idea of like how many people want this. And like, we're not going to make, it's not this crazy venture where we're going to make like mad of them just so that we can, cake up, or we're going to make like, this big venture to make so many people want it, and then kind of like manufacture the desire around the scarcity, or whatever.
Right.
So it's like, it's such a nice, it threads the needle between that desire and like that production, which I mean, it's not exactly the best way to become like a millionaire or whatever, but like, I think Josh will hear this and he'll be like, yep. But like, I think it's I like it that way. And like, yeah, in 20 or 30 years, the people who have GratNin, like, I hope it'll be special to them.
Yeah. I think that achieves a nice balance because it's like, I don't know. I often think back on like, I've talked to comic shops who would say things like back in the 90s when they had like that crazy boom printing like millions of comics, shops would order like 5,000 copies of Turok #1 or something like that. And they would like literally make thrones out of the boxes because they just couldn't sell them. There's no reason for that. That is one of the nice things about, well, first off, I don't even know if you could do exactly what you're doing for GratNin at a traditional publisher, but doing it this way, like you said, it allows you to know exactly what the available interest is and isn't leaving a bunch of stuff overprinted. It just does what is, what the market demands, I suppose.
Yeah. I have an idea that I wish DC or Marvel would steal from me. And I'm probably going to try to figure out a way to do it. If I have the opportunity, I'm going to do it. And that is, stop fucking around. Like, I live in New York City, so I get circulars all the time, right? On the stoop. Like they're coupons. You use them at the grocery store, right? I also get what Design Within Reach puts out a catalog. It's a magazine. It's, probably comes out once a month, maybe. It's better printing quality than any Marvel comic book I ever get.
Yeah.
Yo, stop fucking around. You make the movies. You make so much money off these movies. You're not selling hardly any comics to kids. Start sending out some of these comics. Like have them show up in my mailbox. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
just like introduce a whole other generation to your world and your characters. That easy.
Yeah.
Like that. If the local associated grocery store can give me like a newspaper once a week, plus stop playing around. Like, you don't even have to, like send them out for free.
I love it. I love it. I just have a couple more questions. These ones are less big questions. One I wanted to ask is GratNin started 2004 with Tangerine in the Dark Horse story. And then since then, it's had a total of 3 chapters before becoming GratNin KGMR, which is what was on Webtoon. What is going to be in the print edition? Is it all of GratNin or is it just KGMR?
It's just KGMR. Like, there may be some heretofore unprinted material that relates to some of that stuff, but like, no. This is just KGMR. Like, let me see if I can even remember what GratNin. There's GratNin, Tangerine,
Loan Sharks,
and I think KGMR. And I did one little 1-page strip for Black Mask Comics. Occupy Shadows. It was for the Occupy comic book collection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if we're gonna put Occupy Shadows in there. Like, I think we were talking about it, but yeah, no, this is just KGMR. There's some new material related to KGMR that's not on the webtoon that will be in there, but like, yeah. No, I think Tangerine, you might be able to. I don't know if you can find that in print anymore.
I love like the bonus materials you put in some of the stories, like the kind of like I don't even know how to describe it, like the attributes of some of the characters, like the 100-point ratings for each of them and everything like that.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have cards in there.
Oh my! Wait, as like a reward? Or just in the print edition?
In the print edition, we're gonna have collector's cards.
Oh my god, I love it.
Yeah. So.
That is another thing that growing up, I was born in '84, and so I was like at the apex of loving sports cards, and I was a huge sports fan, and so I would just like die over like NBA cards, baseball cards, et cetera, and like they also had the comic cards back then, and it's just like that type of stuff and stats. I don't know, my brain is just like it can't turn that part off. And like,
I love it too.
Yeah,
I love it too. And actually, my relationship to the big two, most of if I know anything about those stories, it's from when I used to get the packets of the cards. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm reading their stats on the back. I'm like, yo, so Dr. Doom has intelligence, whatever, like so on. And then sometimes you get a card that was like famous battles, and it would tell you this, that, and the third. Like, I love those cards. I had the same thing with Dragon Ball. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I love those cards. Like, that's another thing about the box and how I guess you could say it is it's both materially, but also conceptually different than the webtoon, is that we are presenting the story as the box. Like, you'll notice some things that I do, like little jokes that I do, or like kind of playful, like referencing comics that never came out. You know what I mean? Like, this is my approach to building the world as a story. Like, so for me, the way I experience especially superhero comics, I never read all those comics.
Yeah.
Like, you got a Spider-Man, it's like, oh yeah, pick up Avengers, whatever, to know what happens. Like, I never read that shit. You know what I mean? Like, and I wasn't going to. I didn't have the money, probably, to keep it a buck. I got the one in the 7-Eleven. That's the one I'm going to read. You know what I mean? And by next month, who knows if I can find it. Like, I wasn't a hardcore, So for me, that's part of the aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, the cards are part of the aesthetic of the world. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, the posters, like the little promos, like little things like that to me are a way of experiencing the world. It's not necessarily a side artifact. Like maybe that's how I experienced them originally. Like maybe that's what the world was like even, right? The
Yeah.
world isn't really even like that anymore, right? So part of the medium, it's almost like, why would I, like, why do we have people who are still painting with like tempera or oil or whatever, right? It's their discipline. So like when I'm working in that almost pastiche, that's how I'm thinking, okay, cards is a way that we're telling this story,
Yeah.
and the other things that we have in there. Packaging is a way that we're telling the GratNin story.
I mean, it totally makes sense. I mean, I actually did a feature on those Marvel cards where I went back and I found the people who were like involved with making it and everything. And it was funny. I also talked to some like modern creators who grew up on them, and one of them kind of I think they described it basically as like the Wikipedia of Marvel for kids who were in the 80s. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But it's interesting though, because the cards that you're doing for GratNin sound like they're simultaneously part of the aesthetic, but also, I don't know, it's part of the storytelling. It's part of the understanding of who these characters are and what their world is like.
Yeah, when you look at the stats on those cards, you're like, and how they relate to other characters, like, oh well, okay, that character, we didn't get to read a story where these two characters faced off or they solved a problem together. But on this card, when you hold these two cards, you're like, wow, so this one has this gift, this one has this gift. Also, like, how would that go down? Like, what would happen if these characters, teamed up or fought each other, or, like, would they have drama? Like, I love that. I mean, for me, my imagination of like Spider-Man has always, or Batman or any of them, has always outpaced like anything that I've read. So like part of my approach to it is, can I give that experience or facilitate that experience for readers? Like, what happens in between panels? What happens in between issues? Like, what happens when, your favorite show gets canceled? You know what I mean? Like, did they give you enough to kind of like use your imagination and kind of like explore? I think to me, that's like one of the sexiest things about doing this work is like, how does the art meet the audience halfway and give the audience something to kind of explore and to think about on their own and create on their own?
Yeah. Well, I'm very excited for people to be able to do that. I'm very excited to be able to order my own copy because I got to get those cards. Cards.
You can't, you're not going to believe how ill they are. Like, we really did some cool stuff. Chloe, perfect partner in crime for this. Like, she's really, yeah.
I'm so excited. Well, Ronald, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about GratNin, its upcoming Kickstarter, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Ronald Wimberly. You can find him on Instagram at Ronald Wimberly and in the upcoming GratNin Kickstarter, which launches on March 15th. Love Off Panel and want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter and Instagram at SketchComic or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Cameron Brown, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submit Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Buwan, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Guarino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Paul Slates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Assey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abbott, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.